The galaxy trembled in the aftermath of the most pivotal battle in human history. For years, humanity had been fighting the etc., an ancient and ruthless alien race determined to wipe out all sentient life in their path. The etc's advanced technology had left Earth's defenses struggling to hold ground, but in their darkest hour, the lost Vanguard was humanity's last hope. The Vanguard, a hand-picked group of humanity's most elite soldiers, scientists, and tacticians, was entrusted with a secret mission to infiltrate the etc's homeworld and destroy their core military infrastructure. Commanded by Captain Evelyn Mars, the Vanguard ship, the Sovereign, was humanity's best hope for victory. It was equipped with cutting-edge technology, shielded from etc detection, and manned by the finest minds and soldiers Earth had ever produced. The mission was never meant to fail. Yet when the Vanguard entered etc space, the galaxy lost all contact with them. The Sovereign disappeared without a trace, vanishing into the dark void of deep space. The military scrambled to search for them, but it was as if the ship and its crew had simply evaporated. The galaxy held its breath for a year, hoping for any sign that the Vanguard had succeeded. But when no distress signal came, Earth's leaders were forced to declare them lost, and humanity was left without its final line of defense. In the wake of the Vanguard's disappearance, the etc pushed forward with renewed vigor. They ravaged Earth's colonies, decimated fleets, and advanced on the homeworld itself. The hope of humanity's victory had turned to despair. Every colony that had once looked to the Vanguard for salvation fell into the hands of the etc., who showed no mercy, leaving nothing but ashes and broken spirits in their wake. But the human spirit is not so easily crushed. Years passed, and whispers of the Vanguard's return became nothing more than a faded legend. Earth's military leaders, once emboldened by the Vanguard's mission, were now scrambling to hold back the tide of destruction. Captain Mars and her crew were spoken of in hushed tones, their names now synonymous with the idea of sacrifice. The Sovereign was thought to be gone forever, its crew lost in the abyss of space, their heroism relegated to myth. Then, something extraordinary happened. It began as a faint blip on the farthest reaches of human space, a signal, a distress beacon, a trap. For years, humanity had received false hope from the etc., playing tricks with their communications, making them believe they had found survivors. But this signal was different. It was unmistakably human in origin. The news spread across Earth like wildfire. The lost Vanguard had returned. A message arrived shortly after. It was Captain Mars herself, speaking to the masses through an encrypted broadcast. The Sovereign had emerged from the deepest corners of the galaxy, battered but intact. Against all odds, the Vanguard had survived. But Mars' voice was not filled with relief. It was one of urgency. Her message was clear. The etc. had evolved. Their forces were now more dangerous than ever, and humanity was facing a new wave of destruction. The Vanguard, changed by their time away, were ready to fight once more. But this time, the war would not be as it had been before. As the broadcast ended, Earth held its breath. What had the Vanguard endured during their long disappearance? How had they survived against an enemy that seemed so powerful? And, perhaps most crucially, why had they returned? The answers would only come when they arrived. The Sovereign re-entered human-controlled space on a silent, moonless night. Its arrival sent waves of shock and confusion rippling through Earth's defense network. The fleet dispatched to retrieve the vessel hesitated, unsure whether it was truly the Vanguard ship or another trick played by the etc. It took hours for the fleet to make its way to the Sovereign, its outline dark against the void of space, its hull battered but seemingly intact. When the fleet finally docked, the soldiers and engineers who boarded the Sovereign were met with a haunting sight. The ship was eerily quiet, devoid of life, and its systems appeared dormant. The crew had clearly abandoned their posts, or so it seemed. A sense of dread crept over the soldiers as they moved deeper into the ship, their weapons raised in defense against whatever threat might be waiting. But it wasn't the etc. or any unknown enemy that greeted them. It was the Vanguard. Captain Evelyn Mars was the first to awaken, her voice crackling to life on a forgotten comlink. "I knew you would come," she said, her tone calm but strained. Her words were a strange mixture of relief and urgency. As the captain stepped out of the cryogenic chamber, she looked unchanged, her face firm, her eyes sharp. But there was an odd emptiness about her, as if time itself had not touched her. Behind her, the remaining members of the Vanguard stirred, emerging from their own cryogenic chambers. Lieutenant Juno Castile, the ship's expert in etc. technology, was the next to stand, rubbing her eyes as if waking from a dream. There was no confusion in her movements, no dazed reaction typical of those awakening from cryosleep. She was as alert as she had been when they left. The rest of the Vanguard followed suit, each one looking as if they'd never aged, as if they had simply stepped out of time. The soldiers, the engineers, and the scientists, they all stood ready, their faces hard but resolute. And yet, in their eyes, there was something different, a quiet, almost solemn intensity. "Where are we?" Lieutenant Zandercourt asked, his voice low but steady. Despite the apparent calm, there was something underlying his tone, something unspoken, as if the years they had spent in the unknown had changed him in ways beyond the physical. Captain Mars looked to him and then at the crew. "We're home," she said, "but home has changed." The team quickly made their way to the bridge of the Sovereign, where Mars activated the ship's systems. The familiar hum of the ship's engines returned as the communications grid flickered to life. Messages began pouring in from Earth, from the colonies, and from their allies. The reports were grim. Entire cities had fallen, fleets destroyed, and the etc. were moving with a speed and efficiency unlike anything humanity had ever seen. "The etc. They're different now," Mars murmured, staring at the data coming in. "They've evolved. We miss something." Her voice was filled with a deepening sense of foreboding. Juno Castile stepped forward, analyzing the information. "This isn't just an evolution," she said, her words cutting through the silence. "The etc. have integrated their technology into their biology. They've transformed themselves into something far worse." Mars turned sharply to face the crew. "It's not just about survival anymore. We need to go on the offensive. We need to prepare to strike back." The Vanguard was no longer the same unit that had left Earth. The time they had spent in unknown corners of the galaxy, fighting unimaginable horrors and surviving against impossible odds, had changed them. They had seen worlds fall to the etc., experienced loss and sacrifice on a scale unimaginable to those who had stayed behind. And now they would return to Earth, not as saviors, but as the last line of defense in a war they never thought they would return to fight. The first battle after the Vanguard's return was a brutal awakening for Earth. Despite the time lost and the eerie silence of the Sovereign, the crew immediately mobilized, putting every ounce of their expertise and experience into the war effort. But nothing had prepared them for what they were about to face. Mars convened an urgent meeting with Earth's highest-ranking military leaders, as well as her core team of Vanguard members. They convened in the newly established Earth Defense Command Center, a vast underground facility built to withstand the etc.'s relentless assaults. Maps and schematics of Earth's colonies flashed on the large holoscreen in front of them, showing dark red dots marking the locations of etc.-controlled areas. The once thriving colonies, now in ruin, were crumbling faster than Earth could respond. "The etc.'s tactics have changed," Mars said, her voice unwavering. "They're not just conquering anymore. They're evolving at a rate we've never seen before." Juno Castile, the Vanguard's expert in alien technology, was the first to speak up. Her brow furrowed in concern as she analyzed the data coming in from the colonies. "This isn't just a matter of adapting. It's a full-scale integration of biological and technological systems. They've merged their organic bodies with synthetic enhancements, effectively creating hybrid warriors. They're stronger, faster, and more deadly. Juno's words echoed in the room as the assembled generals exchanged nervous glances. Earth's military had always relied on superior firepower and tactics, but now it wasn't enough. The etc. had gone beyond mere biological enhancements. They had become something else entirely, a terrifying amalgamation of flesh and machine. Their soldiers now possessed the strength to shatter starships with their bare hands and could outmaneuver any human fighter in combat. They've reached a new level of warfare, Mars continued, leaning over the holotable as she pointed to the latest intelligence reports. Our weapons can't keep up with them. We need something new. As if to emphasize her point, the Sovereign scanners detected a massive fleet emerging from the etc.-controlled region, heading directly for Earth's capital cities. The scale of their ships and the sheer size of their fleet suggested they were preparing for an all-out invasion. But what unsettled Mars the most was the way the etc. coordinated their forces. Unlike previous invasions, where their command structures had been rigid and predictable, the etc. now moved with terrifying precision, as if each unit was acting with the singular intent of total destruction. The Vanguard's briefings were interrupted by urgent comms reports from the front lines. A fleet of Earth's best warships was engaging etc. fleet near the colony of Valis, but it was no contest. Within hours, the battle turned into a slaughter. The etc. ships seemed to absorb the blasts from Earth's weapons, as though their hulls had become impervious to standard weaponry. They fought with a ruthlessness that left no quarter. The etc. soldiers on the ground were even more terrifying. As the Vanguard observed the battle footage, they noticed something unsettling. The alien warriors now had the ability to regenerate rapidly from fatal wounds. They would fall, only to rise moments later, their bodies repaired by nanite-like organisms working within their enhanced flesh. Those hybrid soldiers, Captain Mars muttered under her breath, they're more than just improved. They're evolving in real time. They adapt to our strategies before we even execute them. Lieutenant Xander Kor, who had long been a skeptic of the Vanguard's technological prowess, now found himself grappling with the new reality. How do we fight something like this? He asked, his voice a mixture of awe and frustration. We're outclassed. Mars turned to him, determination hardening her gaze. We find a way. We always have. Juno raised her hand. We can't just fight them head-on anymore. We need to understand what drives this evolution. We need to infiltrate their systems and discover what makes them so unstoppable. The team agreed. There was no other option. They would have to use the etc.'s own tactics against them, unpredictability, subversion, and the unique human ability to think outside the box. The Vanguard had always been more than just soldiers. They were humanity's greatest weapon because they were human. They had the resilience to adapt and the ability to survive when faced with the impossible. We'll need to strike at their core, Mars said, her voice resolute. We destroy their ability to evolve, and we destroy them. The war had changed, but the Vanguard's mission remained the same. Humanity's survival depended on the most unlikely of weapons. Their own ingenuity, their will to fight, and the indomitable spirit that defined them. But first, they needed to understand their enemy, and that meant infiltrating the heart of the etc.'s new, terrifying regime. The stakes had never been higher. The Vanguard's return had reawakened a spark of hope across Earth, but that hope was rapidly being overshadowed by the grim reality of the etc.'s terrifying evolution. It was clear that humanity had no time to waste. The next move would require more than just brute strength. It would demand unity, ingenuity, and an unbreakable will to survive. The global response to the etc. threat was swift, as Earth's military leaders coordinated with the Vanguard to devise a new strategy. The Sovereign was refitted with the latest weaponry and defense systems, but it was clear that technology alone would not be enough to turn the tide. Humanity had to outsmart their enemy, and the Vanguard was at the forefront of that effort. But there was a growing sense of unease. The Vanguard might be humanity's finest soldiers, but they were also humanity's last hope. As Earth's generals and the Vanguard's tactical team worked together, the situation grew increasingly dire. The Etc. fleet had already begun their assault on Earth's outer colonies, and reports came in that some colonies were already lost without a fight, devastated by the enemy's rapid adaptation. Military leaders struggled to come up with a defense strategy that could counter the aliens' relentless advance. Mars stood at the head of the war room, her gaze focused on the data streaming in from the front lines. Around her, military officers debated various courses of action, but their voices were growing more frantic, more defeated. It was the same story every time. They had no answers. The Vanguard's presence was the only hope they had left, but even they were uncertain how to proceed. "We can't just keep reacting to them," Mars said, breaking the heated discussions. "We need to change the narrative. It's time to take the fight to them. We need to hit their core." Juno Castile, who had spent days poring over intelligence and studying the Etc.'s evolving tactics, raised her hand. "I think I've found something. The Etc. are clearly adapting at a rapid pace, but there's a pattern in the way they evolve. It's based on their access to new technologies, and we're not just talking about physical weapons. Their biology is directly influenced by the tech they encounter. The key to stopping them may be understanding how they integrate their technology." Mars nodded thoughtfully. "So if we cut off their access to new tech, we might halt their evolution." "Exactly," Juno replied. "But we need to find the source. If we can infiltrate their homeworld and discover how they're accelerating their evolution, we might be able to disrupt the process. We could slow them down long enough for us to retake the initiative." The room fell into silence as the weight of Juno's proposal settled over everyone. Infiltrating the Etc. homeworld was a nearly impossible task, one that had never been attempted. It was deep in enemy territory, surrounded by hostile forces, and their defenses were beyond anything Earth had ever faced. But Mars knew that Juno was right. This was the only option. "We're not asking for permission," Mars said firmly. "We'll assemble a strike team and go in ourselves. If we're right, this could be our last chance to stop them before they completely overwhelm us." Lieutenant Core, who had grown increasingly uneasy about the Vanguard's mission since their return, spoke up. "And if we're wrong, what happens if they are too far gone to be stopped? We'll be throwing away everything we've worked for." Mars turned to face him, her expression resolute. "Then we die fighting. We die protecting our people, protecting our future. But I don't think it will come to that." Xander didn't respond. He knew Mars was right. She always was. The Vanguard had faced impossible odds before and had always come through. But this time felt different. The Etc. were no longer just enemies. They were a force of nature, seemingly invincible. "We'll make our move tonight," Mars continued. "Earth's forces will begin to fortify their defenses, but we're going after the heart of the Etc. We strike their central command, cripple their ability to adapt, and we end this." The generals and military leaders exchanged uncertain glances, but they knew they had no other choice. The Vanguard would lead the charge, just as they always had. As the strategy session came to a close, Mars gathered the team in a private briefing room. There, she and her closest officers began preparing for the dangerous mission ahead. Xander Core was among the last to leave. He lingered in the doorway, his hand on the frame as he stared out at the stars beyond. His mind raced with conflicting thoughts, fear, doubt, determination. Could they really defeat an enemy that had grown so powerful? Could humanity, with all its flaws, truly overcome the overwhelming odds stacked against it? But Mars' voice broke through his thoughts. "Xander, are you with us?" He turned, his gaze meeting hers. "Always." Mars nodded. "Then let's do what we do best. Let's show them what humanity is capable of." And with that, the Vanguard began their final preparations for the most dangerous mission they had ever faced. They would go behind enemy lines into the heart of the Excedrus territory and do what had to be done, no matter the cost. The fate of humanity rested on their shoulders once more. The Sovereign stood ready, its sleek hull reflecting the dim lights of Earth's orbit as it prepared for one of the most dangerous missions humanity had ever attempted. The Vanguard had been briefed, armed, and prepared for their journey into the heart of enemy territory. But even with all their training and experience, there was an undeniable tension in the air. The mission to infiltrate the etc. homeworld wasn't just a strike, it was a calculated gamble, one that could change the fate of the entire galaxy. Captain Evelyn Mars stood on the bridge, her gaze fixed on the coordinates for their destination, her mind running through every possibility. There would be no second chances. The Vanguard had to succeed, not just for Earth, but for the survival of every colony that had fallen to the Excedrus advance. "We're ready to go," Juno Castile said, her voice cutting through the silence as she approached Mars. Juno had been instrumental in recalibrating the Sovereign's stealth systems. The Excedra would be expecting a full assault, but they wouldn't see this strike coming. The ship's cloaking systems are fully operational. We'll be able to slip past their outer defenses without a trace. But once we hit their space, it's anyone's game. Mars nodded, her expression grim. "Once we're in, we'll need to move fast. We don't know what's waiting for us on the other side, but we can't waste time." She turned to the rest of the team, Xander Core, Juno Castile, and the rest of the Vanguard. They were the best humanity had, and this was their moment. As the Sovereign powered up, the ship's engines hummed to life, sending a deep vibration through the hull. The crew took their stations, each one locking in their task, aware of the gravity of the mission ahead. This would be a surgical strike, a deep infiltration into the Excedrus heart of power. If they could disable the alien species' ability to evolve, if they could disrupt their biological and technological symbiosis, Earth's forces might have a chance to reclaim what had been lost. The ship moved smoothly through the void, the stars around them flickering as they crossed the threshold into Excedra space. It was eerily quiet, too quiet. Mars kept her attention focused on the scanners, watching for any signs of detection. The Excedrus' outer defense grids were vast, but the Sovereign's cloaking device rendered them invisible. They were ghosts in the night, slipping deeper into the abyss. Hours passed as the team navigated through a dense nebula, obscuring their path. They were nearing the outskirts of the Excedrus homeworld when the ship's systems suddenly flared to life with an alarming warning. "Captain, we've been detected," Lieutenant Xander Core reported, his fingers flying over the controls. "They've already started tracking us." Mars' heart raced. They were too far in to retreat now. "Initiate evasive maneuvers. Juno, can you hack their systems? Disable their tracking?" Juno's fingers danced over her console as she worked quickly, her eyes scanning the flood of data. "I can try, but it won't be easy. The Excedrus defenses are integrated with their biology now. I'm dealing with a hybrid system, one that learns and adapts as quickly as I can work." "Do what you can," Mars ordered, her voice calm but firm. "We've made it this far, and we're not turning back." The Sovereign lurched as a pulse of energy crackled through the ship, shaking it violently. The enemy ships had locked onto them, and the Excedra weren't holding back. Mars could hear the hum of weapons charging up, ready to obliterate the ship. Juno's voice rang out from the console. "I've disabled their primary tracking grid, but it won't last long. We need to move fast." "Steady," Mars murmured, gripping the armrest of her seat. "We've got one shot at this. Everyone, brace yourselves." With a sudden burst of speed, the Sovereign shot forward, weaving through the energy blasts that shot past them, narrowly avoiding the pursuing enemy ships. The tension was palpable as the team held their breath, relying on Juno's quick thinking to keep them concealed. "We've got a clear path to their planet," Xander reported, his voice a mixture of relief and concern. "But it's not going to be easy getting to the heart of their city." Mars turned to Juno. "Can you break into their communication networks once we're on the surface? We need to know where to strike." Juno's eyes glinted with determination. "I can. Once we're down, I'll be able to pinpoint their central command. But we'll need to move quickly. They'll know we're there the moment we make contact." Mars exhaled slowly, her resolve hardening. "Then we make contact, and we make it count." The Sovereign descended toward the surface of the Etc. homeworld, the alien landscape sprawling below them. It was a desolate place, scared by the Etc's evolution, a world of cold, jagged spires and sprawling metallic cities, darkened by the shadow of their growing empire. As they neared their landing site, Mars couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The Etc. knew they were here, but the Vanguard had come too far to falter now. The moment the Sovereign touched down, the countdown began. Their time was running out. "We're in," Mars said, voice steady, though every nerve in her body screamed with anticipation. "Let's finish this." The Sovereign settled into the barren landscape of the Etc. homeworld with a soft, mechanical thud. Outside, the alien world seemed lifeless. Its sprawling metallic cities stood in eerie silence, their jagged spires casting long shadows over a desolate wasteland. It was as though the planet itself had become a reflection of the Etc., cold, calculating, and devoid of mercy. Mars stood at the front of the ship, her fingers gripping the controls, her mind focused on the task ahead. "The moment we step off this ship, we'll be in enemy territory," she said, turning to face the Vanguard. "Stay sharp. We don't know what we're walking into, but we're not leaving until we've crippled their systems." Xander Core adjusted his armor, double-checking his weapons. "Understood. We need to make sure they don't have any surprises waiting for us." Juno Castile, the team's expert in alien technology, stepped forward. "I'll work quickly to hack into their systems once we're inside, but we'll need to move fast. The longer we're exposed, the more likely they are to adapt to us." The team readied themselves, preparing to breach the cold alien world. The door to the Sovereign's hatch opened with a soft hiss, revealing a bleak, almost sterile landscape. The ground was pockmarked with craters and dark, sprawling complexes were visible in the distance. There was a haunting quiet in the air, and Mars felt the weight of their mission pressing down on her. They were in the heart of the Etc's empire now, and every step forward was a step closer to either victory or annihilation. The team moved swiftly, forming a tight perimeter as they exited the ship. The Vanguard's boots crunched against the metallic surface beneath them, each sound reverberating in the tense silence. They followed Mars, their steps calculated, every movement precise and deliberate. Mars spoke in a low, focused voice. "We'll head toward the central control hub. Juno, take point. I'll watch the rear. We can't afford to get cornered." Juno nodded, her expression cold but determined. She'd faced countless dangers in the past, but this felt different. The Etc. were evolving, and their new form of warfare made them even more unpredictable. They weren't just fighting for survival, they were fighting to change the nature of life itself. Juno's mind raced as she wondered what their central command might look like, what kind of weaponry or defenses they'd encounter once inside. As they moved forward, the team entered a cavernous tunnel system beneath the surface. The walls pulsed with an eerie glow, and the air was thick with a metallic tang. They passed alien machinery, strange devices that hummed with unfamiliar energy. This was the Etc's heart, their technological and biological nexus. If they could infiltrate this place, they would find the key to their evolution, the thing that had made them nearly invincible. But Mars knew that infiltrating the heart of the Etc. meant risking everything. They had no idea how many forces were stationed here, or what kind of security systems the Etc. had put in place. As they pressed on, the sense of danger grew more palpable. The wall seemed to close in on them, the lights flickering ominously. Then, just as they neared the central hub, Juno stopped abruptly, her hand shooting up to signal the others. She raised her wrist calm, scanning the frequencies. I'm picking up signals, lots of them, etc. soldiers. They know we're here. Mars cursed under her breath. How long do we have? Juno's eyes narrowed as she continued to work. Not long. They've already adapted to our cloaking tech. They're moving in fast. Then we move faster, Mars commanded. Prepare for a fight. The Vanguard braced for the worst, weapons at the ready as they continued to push deeper into the complex. But it wasn't just the etc. soldiers they had to worry about. The deeper they went, the more they felt the presence of something else, something intangible. It was as if the planet itself was alive, its systems intertwined with the very biology of the etc. Suddenly, a low rumble echoed through the corridors, and the ground beneath them shook violently. The etc. were launching an assault, but this wasn't just a physical attack. It was something more insidious. The air became thick with energy, and the walls around them pulsed with a strange, otherworldly force. It was as though the etc. had tapped into something beyond their understanding, a power that transcended technology and biology. Juno, Mars shouted, "What's happening?" Juno's eyes widened as she scanned the data. This isn't just a trap. The whole system is being controlled by some kind of central bio-network. The etc. have fused their technology with their very essence. It's like their entire world is a living organism. Mars clenched her fists. Then we'll treat it like one. We cut off the head, and the rest will fall. But as they reached the central command hub, they realized it wasn't just a building. It was an entity. The walls seemed to pulse with a life of their own, and as they breached the entrance, they were met by a sight that made their blood run cold. The core of the etc.'s power lay before them, a massive, pulsing entity, a hybrid of machine and flesh. It was the heart of their evolution, their control center, and the source of their terrifying abilities. But now it was aware of them. The room was bathed in an eerie, bioluminescent glow, the walls pulsing with strange energy as though the very structure itself was alive. In the center of it all stood the heart, the nexus of the etc.'s terrifying power. It was a grotesque fusion of technology and organic matter, a massive, twisting amalgamation of metal and flesh that hummed with unnatural life. It was as though the etc. had created a living machine, something beyond any human comprehension, and it radiated a dark, oppressive force that weighed heavily on the Vanguard's minds. Mars led the charge, her pulse steady despite the overwhelming strangeness of the scene before her. "This is it," she said, her voice low and focused. "This is where we end them." Xander Kor, always the skeptic, exchanged a quick glance with Juno Castile. "If we destroy this thing, we're taking out their entire operation." Juno nodded grimly. "It's their central control system. Destroy this, and their ability to adapt, evolve, and maintain their dominance crumbles. But we'll have to fight through whatever's left of their defenses first." The walls of the chamber began to shudder as the heart pulsed faster, its mechanical tendrils twitching and sparking. The ground beneath their feet rumbled as the entire complex seemed to wake up around them, the floor vibrating with a deep, bone-rattling resonance. Mars turned to face her team, the weight of their mission heavy on her shoulders. "We don't have long. We take down the heart, and we do it fast. Juno, access their systems. Xander, cover her. I'll deal with whatever comes through that door." Before anyone could respond, a low growl reverberated through the room, and a massive metallic door slammed shut behind them, cutting off any escape. The heart had sensed their presence, and now the etc. were mobilizing. Out of the shadows emerged the first wave, hulking etc. soldiers, their bodies a grotesque mix of biological and technological enhancements. Their massive, insectoid limbs clattered against the floor, and their mandibles clicked in anticipation. These creatures were far stronger and faster than any standard soldier the Vanguard had fought, their bodies infused with the adaptive technology of the heart. Incoming! Xander shouted as he took aim and fired his weapon, sending a volley of high-energy blasts at the advancing aliens. Mars leaped into action, charging at the nearest Etc. warrior with her blade drawn. She slashed through its armored exoskeleton, but the creature didn't fall. Instead, it recoiled, and within seconds, its damaged body began to regenerate, its flesh shifting as the adaptive technology kicked in. The Vanguard had never faced anything like this before. "We need to disable their regeneration," Mars barked. "Juno, any luck with the systems?" Juno was hunched over a console, her fingers flying across the alien interface. "I'm in, but it's complex. The heart is sending out signals to their bodies, directing the regeneration. If I can hack into the central network, I can stop it, but I need time." The Etc. warriors closed in, their mandibles snapping as they advanced with deadly precision. Mars danced around the incoming attacks, her movements fluid, as though she were a part of the chaos. With every strike, the creatures fell, but their bodies quickly reformed, and the fight became a battle of attrition. "Keep pushing forward," Mars ordered, slashing down Etc. warrior and watching its form twitch and reform into something even more terrifying. "Juno, you have seconds." Juno didn't look up, her entire focus now on the pulsing system before her. Her fingers blurred over the console, her mind working faster than her body could keep up. "Almost there," she muttered, sweat dripping down her brow. "Just a little longer." Another Etc. creature lunged at her from the shadows, its claws outstretched, but Xander's blaster fired just in time, vaporizing the creature before it could reach her. "Focus, Juno," Xander shouted, his voice tinged with urgency. Mars fought with a ferocity that had become second nature. She slashed through the Etc. with deadly precision, her sword moving faster than human reflexes should allow. But the creatures just kept coming. For every one that fell, 2 more took its place. The heart was clearly controlling the battle, its tendrils reaching out to influence the enemies, regenerating them faster than they could kill. But Mars refused to let up. They had no other choice but to keep fighting, keep pushing. Every second counted. "I'm in," Juno finally shouted, her voice a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. "I've located the central processor. I'm sending the command to disable their regeneration systems." The heart seemed to react violently, its tendrils thrashing, as though it sensed its control slipping. The Etc. soldiers froze for a moment, their bodies twitching as they struggled to adapt, but their regeneration systems started to fail. The creatures, once unstoppable, now began to slow, their bodies starting to degrade. "We have a window," Mars shouted. "Push them back now." With renewed resolve, the Vanguard unleashed their full fury. Xander fired, taking down Etc. after Etc., while Mars and the rest of the team fought with everything they had left. Slowly, the momentum began to shift in their favor. The Etc., now deprived of their regenerative abilities, were no match for the Vanguard's precision and firepower. But the heart wasn't done yet. The central processor flickered, and a pulse of raw energy exploded from it, sending a shockwave through the room. The walls cracked, and the ground buckled beneath them. The heart was beginning its final defense. "Juno," Mars yelled, her voice urgent, "now or never." Juno's hands trembled as she keyed in the final command, her breath quickening. "This is it." A final pulse of energy surged through the chamber, and with it, the heart began to crumble, its once regenerative power flickering and dying. The rune shuddered as the alien heart of the Etc. Empire collapsed in on itself. Mars exhaled, her muscles aching from the intensity of the battle. "It's over," she said quietly, "but we need to get out, now." The Vanguard had won, but the cost was far from clear. They had dealt the Etc. a decisive blow, but the war was far from over. The chamber was silent now, save for the distant hum of the collapsing heart, which had begun to lose its unnatural power. The pulse of energy that had surged moments ago was fading, the air now thick with the scent of ozone and charred metal. The Vanguard stood amidst the wreckage of what had once been the very core of the Etcetera's empire. The walls, cracked and crumbling, had begun to collapse inward, as if the alien heart was taking the entire structure down with it. Mars stood at the center of the destruction, her breath ragged, her body bruised but unbowed. She could feel the tremors beneath her feet, the ground groaning under the weight of the collapse. They had won, for now, but the cost had been high. Their mission had succeeded, but it had only been one step in a much longer battle. There was no telling how long it would take for the Etcetera to rebuild or adapt, but for the first time in years, Mars felt the faintest flicker of hope. "We need to move," Xander called out, his voice cutting through the heavy silence. "The whole place is coming down. It won't be long before this whole sector's obliterated." Mars nodded, turning toward the exit. The team had no time to celebrate or reflect. They had one shot to escape, and the Sovereign was their only ticket out. "Juno, can you secure an escape route?" Mars asked, scanning the crumbling surroundings for any sign of an exit. Juno nodded, her face grim. "I'm working on it. The systems are failing, but I found a bypass that should lead us straight to the hangar. Just keep moving." The Vanguard fell into formation, moving as one unit through the collapsing tunnels. The rumble of the crumbling structure echoed in their ears, and the light from the flickering walls barely illuminated their path. They moved quickly, adrenaline surging as they navigated through the chaos. The ground cracked and shifted beneath them, the very fabric of the alien city falling apart, but they pressed on. Ahead, the faint glow of an emergency exit illuminated the path. It was their only chance to make it out alive. The Vanguard picked up the pace, their footsteps echoing through the cavernous corridors as they neared the hangar bay. Then, a series of low, grinding noises erupted from the walls, followed by the shriek of metal twisting. Mars' heart skipped a beat as a massive biomechanical door slid shut in front of them, blocking their way. The Etcetera had activated a final defense mechanism, one that would trap them in the heart of their empire. "Shut it down," Mars barked. "Juno now." "I'm trying." Juno's voice was strained, her eyes scanning the failing system. "The security grid's gone haywire. Wait, there's a manual override." Without missing a beat, Mars sprinted toward the massive door, her blade drawn. "We don't have time for delays. Get it open." Xander and the rest of the team formed a perimeter, covering Mars as she reached the control panel. Sparks flew as she ripped open the control access, her hands moving with practiced speed. The door groaned as the manual override system activated. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, the door began to lift, the metal straining against the pressure. "Hurry!" Xander shouted, his voice urgent as a second, larger wave of Etcetera soldiers stormed the corridor behind them, their adaptive bodies regenerating with every strike they took. The door shuddered as it inched open, but the Etcetera were relentless. They would be upon them in seconds, and Mars could feel the weight of their impending demise. She glanced at Juno, who was desperately working to stabilize the failing systems. "You're almost there." Then the door finally gave way, the last barrier between them and freedom collapsing as the team dove through it. The hangar bay lay ahead, their ship, the Sovereign, barely visible through the chaos of sparks and debris. "Go, go," Mars shouted, her voice like a whip as she sprinted ahead. The Vanguard poured into the hangar, but as they neared the ship, an explosion rattled the walls, sending debris flying. The Sovereign's engines roared to life as the team reached the ship, climbing aboard with frantic haste. "We're not out yet," Xander yelled, watching the incoming swarm of Etcetera forces. "Take off in 10 seconds." Mars nodded, her eyes scanning the perimeter as she climbed into the cockpit. The ship's engines whined as the countdown began, the massive craft lifting off from the surface, just as the Etcetera forces closed in. A hail of gunfire and energy blasts pummeled the hull, but the Sovereign shot upward, breaking through the atmosphere just in time. The chaos of the battlefield, the crumbling remnants of the Etc. city, faded into the distance as the ship ascended into space. Mars exhaled deeply, her chest tight, as the team gathered in the command deck. The stars stretched out before them, endless and cold, as the Sovereign soared into the void. For the first time in years, the weight of the galaxy felt just a little lighter. They had struck a blow to the Etc., one that would be felt across the stars. But this was only the beginning. The war wasn't over, and the enemy was still out there. Mars stood at the front of the ship, looking out into the cold vastness of space. "We've bought humanity a little more time," she said quietly, "but the real fight is just beginning." As the Sovereign raced toward Earth, the Vanguard knew one thing for sure: they would never stop fighting. Not until the Etc. were defeated, and humanity reclaimed its place among the stars. They were humanity's boldest fighters, and this was their moment to rise.